Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So I'll start the video off by apologizing for missing the past couple of episodes. There's been a lot going on here and I just did not have time to produce any videos, to film anything along those lines. But we are back now and we are going to work more on the fuel surge tank for the Supra. So if you remember in the last video, I went ahead and started making this box style fuel surge tank, if I can rotate my arm around. But this is what we ended up with at the end of last video. And the more that I thought about it, I really was not too keen or too stoked on how this was coming out. It just would look like a giant catch can in the engine bay, and it wouldn't have the aesthetics that I wanted it to. However, I did remember that right here I have an 8-inch diameter piece of aluminum tubing that I had purchased to use as a potential option for the body for the muffler on the car. So if you remember, we have essentially an 8-inch box that we are working around to make this fuel surge tank, and being that this is a piece of 8-inch diameter tubing, this will work out perfectly for it and give me more of the aesthetic that I am looking for. So obviously the car is not here to determine exactly how this piece of tubing needs to be coped and needs to fit in the engine bay, but I do have the Supra's cousin, or second cousin, third cousin, whatever, right here in the form of my SC300. And I went and I measured this area back here that the surge tank will sit in, and it appears to be dimensionally identical to that of the Mark IV Supra. So we are going to use the SC300 as a fixture or a jig essentially to get this piece of tubing cut and coped the way that it needs to be, to allow me to go ahead and build this surge tank the way that it needs to be constructed. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hover this piece of tubing in here and figure out exactly how it needs to be cut so it sits down where I need it to sit down at, sits down below this portion of the cowl right here, and at that point it'll fit in its home correctly and I can get started working on the internals of it, which is where a lot of my theories and ideas will be able to be put into practice. So without further ado, let me go ahead, get some measurements made, start cutting, and we'll get this thing fit in here. There we go. I have the body of the surge tank fit in place, and obviously it will sit a little bit differently in the Supra's engine bay, as the Lexus has many more bits cluttering the engine bay than the Supra does, but at least this fits in its home the way that it needs to. So we have a miter cut on the bottom side that will allow it to clear all of the set this over here, but all of this architecture on the back side of the wheel well. Obviously the engine bay is black, it's a little bit difficult to see in the current lighting, but there are some lumps and bumps and a radius or an angle that rear portion of sheet metal is comprised of that necessitated having to take this miter cut out of the, I guess, the foremost side of this surge tank body. So I have this cut made now, and if you notice, I guess if I put the ruler across here, there will be a flat section pretty much where my middle finger is right here, and that will essentially be used as a fuel bowl on the bottom side of the surge tank. Now, a Mark IV Supra's fuel tank, its factory fuel tank, they have on the inside of them, I believe they do call it the bowl, but it's literally, it looks like a piece of Tupperware on the inside of the fuel tank that the pump hanger and the pump sock sit down inside of. So that way, in theory, it keeps the fuel contained, or it keeps an amount of fuel contained rather, right around where the fuel pump pickup is, and prevents fuel starvation under heavy acceleration or braking or cornering or what have you. So granted, this surge tank shouldn't have any issue as far as maintaining an adequate amount of fuel flowing into it, and maintaining an adequate fuel level, I guess would be the correct way to put it. But just to do my due diligence, I wanted to have some sort of a flat and some sort of a bowl on the bottom side of the surge tank that will act the same way that the factory fuel tank does. So beyond that, the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. Like I said, it took that measurement, the miter cut, and everything else. It seems to fit in its home just the way that it needs to. So now at this point, I guess I can go ahead. It probably makes sense to start making the siphon tube and the return tube and everything along those lines. So what I'm going to do is, I have 4 of these number 12 ORB female bungs, and especially the siphon tube or the feed tube to the mechanical pump out of the surge tank. I'm going to go ahead and make an internal tube that this tube will sit down at the bottom of that bowl portion on, or inside of the surge tank rather, because, and granted, like we said before, the surge tank should constantly be filled with a volume of fuel, but I want to at least have it siphon out of the lowest portion of the tank. So I'm going to take these pieces. This is 1.5 1/8" wall aluminum tubing, and I'm going to attempt to put this in the tube bender and bend this to 90 degrees, so that way this, I guess, outlet fitting for the tank, or inlet fitting, or I guess it would be the outlet fitting, will be somewhere on the side body of the surge tank here, and that siphon tube will sit down neatly at the bottom of the surge tank. So that way it's constantly drawing from the lowest portion of the tank, and I never have to worry about it starving for fuel unless the lift pump or the electric pump that will be in the rear of the car that feeds fuel to that surge tank, unless it goes out or something along those lines. So with all that being said, and I know I am rambling at this point, let's go ahead and get this piece of tubing bent, and we'll see where we go from there. That worked much better than I anticipated it working. So this tubing is 6061 tubing, and if you guys know much about the different alloys of aluminum, you know that 6061 is not the most keen on bending and altering its shape. However, with a little bit of preheat that you guys saw, I was able to bend this, and it's a little bit less than 90 degrees, but that is perfectly fine, as I can make a couple of cuts and make this fit exactly the way that I want it to. So I'm going to go ahead, and where I have my permanent marks on it currently, I'm going to make those cuts, and from there we can figure out, if you can see it, I have the body of the surge tank over in the Lexus engine bay, and I can figure out where the piece of tubing is going to make its entrance and or exit from the from the body of that tank, and we can keep rocking on from there. So let me go ahead, I'll make these cuts, and we can move forward from there. There we go. We have the outlet that this will feed the mechanical pump. It is welded in, and we have our siphon tube put in place that goes down. I wish I would have gone a little bit deeper with it, but again, this thing should be full of fuel at any given point in time. So the siphon tube is merely a bit of due diligence that I wanted to employ into this design. So I welded inside as much as I could, and obviously welded the whole way around the outside. And if you guys have been around here for any period of time, you know I like to use female bungs on things like this, so that way I can thread the tapered surface in, just like so. And we got lucky with this one where I didn't end up having to run a tap through it, but again, I highly advise tapping any female threaded bung post-welding that you put into a part that you're building, just so that way you don't end up getting the adapter fitting stuck into it and cause yourself a whole lot of problems and grief. But this guy threads in the whole way, and obviously I don't have the O-ring on it right now, but that fits in there very nicely. I have a nice track down to the bottom side of this tank, and we go over here, how this thing fits in here. We'll have a little bit of room for rotation, but this gives us a nice outlet that goes facing the engine, and this line will run around the back of the engine and up to the mechanical pump that, if you remember, on the Supra is driven off of the intake cam gear. So now that I have this portion of the tank completed, I can go ahead and I'm going to build the bottom section of it, or the bottom cap. So what we are going to do, since this is an 8-inch diameter tube, and the old box style is all based off of 8-inch wide pieces of sheet metal, I'm going to go ahead and scavenge the pieces for the caps off of the old tank design. Otherwise, this would just end up being a partially completed tank and a waste of aluminum, but being that the dimensions are very similar, I can go ahead and I can make use of these pieces rather than having them just sit for the rest of eternity not being used for anything. So this 8-inch wide, 12-inch long section will be what I use to make the bottom cap, and this 8-inch square here is what I'll use to make the top cap when the time comes for that. So I guess I can go ahead and I can get the old tank cut apart, so that way I have a blank canvas to work on with that piece of aluminum, and get some cardboard so that way I can draw out the shape that will be necessary to cut out of this piece, cut that, get it dollied into place, and then that cap can be welded on. And the bottom cap is now on the surge tank. So obviously it's what it looks like on the bottom side. Have one break right here. This is our bowl section right in here. And then this is just our clearance flat section right there. On the inside, this is what we're looking like here. And essentially this fitting sits perpendicular to the fuel rail, or parallel to the fuel rail rather. Or, good lord, it sits parallel to the firewall. So back here is where we'll be drawing from. And you can see I went ahead on the inside and smoothed out a little bit where I had a bit of a gap to fill, just to not have any stalactites or stalagmites of aluminum sticking there. But fits very nicely, or everything looks very nice on the inside. And I think what I'm going to do is I'd really like there to be a really smooth appearance to this. I'm going to go ahead and sand the welds down and smooth out the corners so that way it looks like it's all one uniform piece. So I usually don't do this, but for this piece, I want to experiment with that a little bit and see if I like the aesthetic of it. If I do, great. If not, then I know what not to do in the future. But I'll go ahead and get geared up with some PPE, and I can go ahead and sand these welds down. There we have our smoothed out tank bottom. Now, it probably isn't perfect, and I'll more than likely come back in with some fresher sandpaper once I can go and get some. But for the time being, it is nice and smooth, and everything is radiused, at least in the ballpark of the way I wanted it to be. So I went ahead and I also pulled off the square piece off of the old surge tank, and this piece, set it down on here and get her centered up, roughly centered up. It fits pretty much perfectly on this square. So I'll go ahead and I will get an ID measurement of the surge tank that we're working on now. I will transfer that over to the piece of, or the square piece of sheet metal. I can cut that out, and from there I can go ahead and I can weld that piece to the surge tank and get that portion of this project wrapped up. So I'm debating if I want to put some sort of a cap on this surge tank. I've ran a few scenarios through my head where it would be advantageous to have that feature integrated into it, but I'm not 100% sold one way or another just yet. But that doesn't prevent me from going ahead and getting this piece at least welded up as much as I can. So like I said, I'll go ahead, transfer dimensions onto this piece, cut it out, and get it welded onto the surge tank. There we go. Have the top cap on our surge tank here, and you can see that I have a center punch right there. That should be pretty much dead nuts center of this top portion, in case I want to put a cap on it, which the more I think about it, I'm leaning towards putting a cap on it, just so I can pre-fill this thing if I need to. I can coat the inside of it if I need to. And I can look at the inside of it if I need to for any reason. But pretty happy with how it's coming out so far. And I guess let me go ahead, I'll throw it in the engine bay of the Lexus. And even though it obviously is not the car that it's going into, we can kind of get an idea how it's going to look in the Supra's engine bay. And I can kind of eyeball a little bit as far as where the other bungs need to be placed and what have you. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. So obviously the engine bay in the Lexus is a little bit more congested than that of the Supra, but that thing looks gigantic in there. But I think it is going to work out just fine. Now, obviously, I have to put the rest of the bungs in, and I have to determine their locations before I can punch holes in the surge tank and make everything fit that way. But at least for the time being, we have the bulk of the initial work done on this part, and I am stoked with how it's coming out. So this will, like I said before, this will be the line that feeds out to the mechanical pump, and that leaves us with 3 additional bungs that need to be put in place here. So we need to put a bung in for the actual feed from the lift pump or the electric pump in the rear of the car. We need to put a return from the regulator to the surge tank, and we need to put a return from the surge tank to the fuel tank in the rear itself. So 3 additional bungs, but I'm not going to put those in right now, as I want to get the cap that I'm going to use in first, so that way any shavings, any metal fragments, anything like that, I can get those out more easily. And I also want to have that in place for locating the other bungs, as I might do some additional tube work on the inside of it, just to kind of direct flow of fuel rather than have things just dump into the tank and create all kinds of cavitation and things that we do not want in this surge tank. So with that being said, I think we have just about ran out of things that I can accomplish today on this project. I know it was not the most action-packed video, but it does feel really good after a couple-week hiatus to get back to it and to obviously make some progress on another part for the car, but also to put a video out for you guys, as I really do greatly enjoy making these videos. So with that being said, I think that's going to be about the end of this video. So as always, you guys are awesome. You guys make this channel what it is, and especially now with all of the things going on in my personal life, you guys are more needed than ever. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you very much for tuning in and watching me piddle around and tinker with all these different projects. But with that being said, that is going to be the end of this video. So until next time, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next episode.